Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. If you'd like to support my channel, please check out the link above to my Patreon page. I'll also put the link down below in the description. I'm back with a replay of round 3 of a Modern League. I won the die roll, currently 2-0 after beating Eldrazi Tron in blue-white control. And this is a nice keep, 3 lands, 4 spells. Going to open up with Island. This kind of demonstrates that Seize Claim is actually significantly stronger on the draw. If the opponent opens up and plays a tapped land, we can play our first island and plop Seize Claim immediately on top of whatever land they played. A Bloodstained Mire, could be Jund. But it's probably Newgaak. Could be some kind of dredge build. And against this kind of explosive graveyard stuff, I think we're going to try to attack their lands. It's a good form of interaction. I think they only run like 18 lands. So if they kept a one-lander, we can shut them off pretty well. They get in with the Neonate. They have a Gemstone Mine, but they just pass the turn. So I'm definitely going to play that second C. Get a Lord on the table. This AEther Vial kind of unnecessary since I've got a bunch of lands. So they sack Insolent Neonate, discard a Vengevine, and just draw a card. Okay, they have another land with the Swamp. They go Stitcher Supplier, hitting a Golgari Thug and a Gravecrawler. So there's so many variations of these graveyard decks floating around right now. So I'm going to play Reejerey, going to play Ben, tap down the Stitcher Supplier, even though I don't really need to. Well, I guess I do need to since this guy doesn't have Island Walk. We'd prefer for them to not be able to block with Stitcher Supplier because we don't want to fill up their graveyard with more stuff. So here's a Gravecrawler. They do have a 4th land, which very unlikely for these decks. Cast Cryptbreaker from hand, and here's Vengevine. But all we wanted them to do on this turn, basically, is tap out of whatever mana that they can use, because we've got lethal coming now. Actually, them playing that Shock was huge for us, because we're going to have 12 next turn with Island Walk, and without the Tomb, I believe we would have just had... they would have been at 14. And it looks like a Newgaak is on its way. So drew another AEther Vial, but thanks to the painful mana base, we now have Xaxes. So I guess that was a great game for the Merfolk Lords, bringing more power than they could deal with before they got Newgaak online. So I'm always happy to steal game 1 off of these explosive graveyard decks. Even better after sideboarding, since we get to bring in things like Relic of Progenitus. So let's go ahead and take a look at those sideboarding decisions. Okay, back for game 2 against Newgaak. Let's check out the sideboard. So I took out all 4 Force of Negations. I did discuss this with the Merfolk Discord. Force of Negation much worse now against Newgaak since they're not really running Altar anymore. It's pretty much all creatures. So 4 forces, pretty easy to take out. I took out 1 Reejerey, just a little bit expensive, and we wanted to make space for slightly better cards out of the sideboard. So I brought in 3 Relics, obviously our best choice against a graveyard deck, and then 2 Echoing Truths. Since they don't have Altar, they actually have fewer sack outlets. I think the only one now is Carrion Feeder. So Echoing Truth, often live. If we want to bounce a Newgaak, the opponent can't just use Altar to sack him and get 8 more cards in the graveyard. So 3 Echoing Truths, 3 Relics, 2 Relics, 3 Relics, 2 Echoing Truths. Unfortunately, I have to mulligan this. That's a rule of mine that I try to stick to as much as possible. Don't keep one-landers without AEther Vials. Except if you're on a mulligan already. And then I felt like I kind of had to keep at 6. Put one of those Tricksters down, and really we just want to draw some lands here. The opponent goes into that sack outlet I mentioned. We did draw a land with Mutavault, which is pretty sweet. On the draw, we can't really afford to be super duper patient and leave up mana for Relic on turn 2. So Citrus Supplier, I guess we should have their graveyard open. What I mean to say is we can't just wait till turn 2 to cast Relic. If they have a way to destroy it right away, like say they play a green source and Assassin's Trophy, that would actually be good for us because ramping us is pretty good given the state of our hand. Hey, they do have a second land. Let's start trimming their graveyard. They have a Golgari Thug in the graveyard, and I'm not sure if this is sort of standard at this point. I think that the Newgaak decks are kind of in flux right now. The one that I saw before this was the same one that recently went 12-0 in this past weekend's Modern Challenge, and I don't think that list was running Golgari Thugs. But this card by itself can dredge enough cards into the graveyard that they should be able to cast a Newgaak if they have one in hand. So it would have been reasonable for me to crack the Relic here, but again, on the draw, I felt like I couldn't play so super defensively, and it could well have been a mistake. They do have a sack outlet with Citrus Supplier, which can put 3 cards into the graveyard, well 4 because of the Citrus Supplier itself. So I felt kind of backed into a corner here. They don't have any big attackers for the next turn, so I don't need to leave up mana for Trickster. So I decided to go for a Silvergill here. Maybe I can draw another blue source. I don't know exactly what would be best here. Just another Mutavault. I mean, we need to draw through the top of our deck anyway. Even if the Mutavault is not the best card, we were going to draw it on our next turn anyway, is what I mean to say. So they're going to definitely dredge this Golgari Thug. Fortunately for them, they hit that Vengevine. That's pretty nice. Satyr Wayfinder was in that 12-0 list, so it's possible I'm mistaken and this is that list that did really well. Okay, now that was a pretty good dredge for them. Or I should say Wayfinder put the cards in the graveyard. They hit a Dark Blast. Obviously pretty great against us, but we're going to crack this Relic if we get out of this turn alive. So hopefully they won't get to actually draw that Dark Blast. Sacking Citrus Supplier to the Carrion Feeder. They see a Bloodghast, a Gravecrawler. They've already played a Satyr Wayfinder. Bloodghast comes back with the Catacombs. They sacrifice it, make the Carrion Feeder bigger, sacrifice the land, trigger Bloodghast again. Cast Gravecrawler from the graveyard. Triggers Vengevine. Of course, I think they have a Newgaak in hand, so they're going to start tapping some creatures. There's Newgaak. Now remember, this is after my turn 2. They have 8, 12, 14, 16, 17, 20 power on board after I've played 2 lands. So I pretty much knew I was going to scoop here. Nothing I can do. I passed. I thought I was just going to try to tap down Newgaak, trump a Vengevine, take a bunch of damage. Unfortunately, also this Pain Land is kind of hitting me. With the second Vengevine, there was nothing I can do. So this is these new Newgaak decks sort of firing on all cylinders, getting Vengevines back, recurring Bloodghast and Gravecrawlers to make a big Carrion Feeder. So yeah, they just trounced me in game 2 when they were on the play. Let's see if I was able to do the same with Merfolk when I'm on the play in game 3. Okay, back for game 3 against this new Newgaak deck. Unfortunately, I have to mulligan again. But this is a keep. 2 lands, we've got some Tricksters to slow down any big creatures, but we don't need 3 Tricksters. I do like having Lords. A lot of their creatures can't block. Some of these new lists are running blue for Hedron Crab anyway, so Island Walk is great. Relic is sweet, but without like Altar of Dementia, we don't really have to worry about these extremely explosive turn 2s anymore. So I'm going to take the opportunity with the tempo advantage being on the play to get a Lord on the table. Opponent pushes it, attacks with Gravecrawler, and it looks like the opponent doesn't have a second land, which could potentially be huge for us. Going to play Reejerey. Hope that we dodge another Fatal Push. Possible the opponent kept like a Swamp and 3 Fatal Pushes or something. Definitely not trading with the Gravecrawler. And the opponent just has a Carrion Feeder, so this is huge for us because now we can get the Relic on board. And with Reejerey's tap ability, we can tap down both attackers by flashing in Trickster. Trim that Fatal Push from the yard. Carrion Feeder can't block, so we're going to start getting in. Opponent goes to combat. I'm going to flash in Trickster. Let's think about what should get targeted with what ability. So Carrion Feeder is the one with an activated ability, so probably better to target the Carrion Feeder with the Trickster. Now, it's possible they could respond now by sacrificing the Gravecrawler, making Carrion Feeder a 2/2, and then they can still recast the Gravecrawler on their second main. Okay, they have a second land. Interesting there, though. They're definitely representing trophy here by leaving the 2 lands up. So I made a slight mistake here. I drew a Ben, and with Reejerey on the board, you should typically just play Benthic Biomancer right away and then untap your land to get it on the battlefield for free. If I was in fact thinking that they had removal up, and I was, I'm putting the Reejerey at risk here. So if they are able to kill it, I won't be able to untap the land that casts Benthic Biomancer. So opponent exiling Newgaak, interesting, to cast Force of Vigor to force me to crack Relic. So that's sort of fine. We get to cycle it. Echoing Truth is great. It's one of my 5 sideboard cards. Opponent cracks the Verdant Catacombs, takes 2 from Overgrown Tomb. So that's the 2 damage that Reejerey would have done. And there's the trophy. So continuing to ramp me, I guess making up for me not untapping the land on my first main phase by casting Benthic Biomancer with Reejerey on the table. Opponent goes down to 13. Let's get the Benthic Biomancer down. I am going to tap down this Carrion Feeder. Opponent's graveyard is pretty empty. I'll happily take 2 from the Gravecrawler. Gonna go to combat here. Getting for 5, and I'll probably adapt. I guess it might have made sense to, I mean, we don't really want to crack this Waterlogged Grove because we'd love to be able to cast, or at least hold up Echoing Truth. But I like the idea of getting in for more damage here. Reejerey's awesome, so I'm just going to pitch the Silvergill Adept here, I think. So, opponent misstepping there. Looks like they have removal, and they should have just responded to the Adapt. But they let me loot and then kill the Ben, so pretty loose opponent. And now I can cycle the Waterlogged Grove since it gave me another land. And another Lord is awesome because neither of these guys can block. And I can cast Reejerey and cast Master, get a tap trigger to tap down anything that they cast that can block. Got Echoing Truth up for this turn, and as we saw in game 1, they do damage themselves with their mana base a lot. Okay, so now they're within lethal here. They're leading off with Faithless Looting, pitching a Gravecrawler and a Newgaak, bringing back the Gravecrawler. They're going to cast that Newgaak. Going to get in with Carrion Feeder, sack one of the Gravecrawlers, hit for 2 instead of 1, and then I guess recast the Gravecrawler. And then at that point they F6'd. So I targeted Newgaak with Echoing Truth, and since they F6'd, they weren't able to sack it to the Carrion Feeder, which would have been better because Newgaak is sort of the same in their hand as it is in their graveyard. And so sacrificing it would have just made their Carrion Feeder bigger. But with them tapped out and no creatures able to block, I already know that I have the win. So let's go Reejerey. Creatures are now 3/3s. Tap the Gravecrawler, don't have to. Creatures are now 4/4s, and the opponent's going to take 8. So pretty solid performance against one of these new Newgaak decks. I've been doing fairly well against them. Actually, I think if you look at my overall wins and losses against them, it's probably like excellent. I think maybe I've only lost like once recently, even though I've played against them at least 3 times where they've had, I think it was 16, 17, and 20 damage on turn 1 in 3 separate game 1s. But in all of those, I just I went on to win games 2 and 3. So they can pretty consistently put out a ton of power on turn 2, but not like every single game consistent. And since none of their creatures can block a lot of the time, if we just play a bunch of Lords, it's often enough to win against these guys. As I mentioned, Echoing Truth is now actually surprisingly decent in the matchup. If they don't have Carrion Feeder on the board, they don't really have a sack outlet. So, we can comfortably bounce like multiple Gravecrawlers if that's the big threat, multiple Vengevines. Bouncing Newgaak is kind of a big tempo play because they're going to need to get like 5 more cards into the graveyard in order to recast it. So yeah, pretty decent matchup for us, especially when they play blue for Hedron Crab. So please leave your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. Please take a moment to check out my Patreon page if you'd like to support these videos. And tune in for the next one where I'll be back with round 4 of this Modern League. Currently 3-0 after beating Eldrazi-Tron, Blue-White Control, and now one of these new Newgaak decks. So I'll see you guys there. Bye.